Okay. Okay. So yesterday we talked about, you know, quickly what is aging, and we said that what are the ways in which one can explain the fact that aging happens. So we talked about a bunch of hypotheses. We are going to look at some of those hypotheses today. So one of the hypothesis is okay. There are two different class of theories. One class of theories is what is known as the mechanistic theories of aging, which suggests that there is some underlying mechanism behind it, and that mechanism is probably consistent across groups of species. And the aim of the research is to figure out that kind of mechanism. The other kind is the evolutionary theories of you know aging, which suggests that aging is an inevitable evolutionary phenomena. The precise details of the mechanism by which it is happening can be anything depending on the taxa. So, uh, in the mechanistic theories of aging, there are various kinds of mechanisms that have been proposed. So, one of them is what is known as the rate of living hypothesis, which actually is a pretty old one, and this one goes back all the way to Galen, the legendary doctor in the 2nd century AD. So the primary assumption in this is that all species, they end up spending roughly the same amount of energy per gram body weight within their lifetime. Now the rate at which they spend this energy that is variable. So some spend it faster. So these are the guys who have higher metabolic rates, and some spend it slower. These are the guys with lower metabolic rates. So which basically boils down to that those species which have a greater metabolic rate, they are the ones who will die faster. So they are the ones who will have lower longevity. So how does one test this? Obviously, this is a very simple observational hypothesis. So you simply observe and see whether this seems to be correct or not. People have been trying to test it for some time, and one of the slightly biggish studies was in 1991, where people looked at 164 mammalian species from 14 different orders. Okay, so what you have here, over here, these are the various types of mammals, and over here is the lifetime energy expenditure given in kilocals per gram. So as you can see that there is a huge amount of diversity in terms of the total amount of energy they are spending. However, the problem is that if you look closely, then there are several exceptions that comes out in this. So for example, if you look at the bats, okay, now you know that the bats are the flying mammals, and since they are flying, flight is a highly energy consuming thing, and bats actually have the highest metabolic rates amongst all mammals of a comparable size. Incidentally, bats also have higher longevity. They live, roughly speaking, 3 times longer than other mammals of comparative sizes, which completely flies in the face of the rate of living hypothesis. Similarly, if you look at the marsupials, so these are the the kangaroos and the opossums and all that. Marsupials have amongst the lowest metabolic rates, although they also have the lowest longevity. So if you just look at the two extremes, bats have the highest metabolic rate and the highest longevity. These guys have the lowest metabolic rate and the lowest longevity. So taken together, it doesn't look like that the rate of metabolism is going to explain the longevity. Similarly, if you compare birds with mammals, both of them are endotherms, yet the longevity, which basically means that the metabolic rates are within the same order of magnitude. Obviously, typically, most birds have slightly higher longevity, slightly higher metabolic rates, but still they are comparable. But the problem is that in terms of longevity, birds have a far greater longevity than the mammals. Similarly, if you compare ectotherms, the cold-blooded animals, with endotherms, the warm-blooded animals, obviously the warm-blooded animals have much greater metabolic rate, but that does not translate into greater longevity for them. So taken together, although this hypothesis is very popular, although you can find it cropping up here and there, rigorous research or rigorous observations do not support this particular hypothesis. So yeah, so then we go to the next one, which is something I think some of you brought up yesterday, that if you think of the organism as a machine, okay, the so-called machine metaphor of life, then we know that when a machine runs, for long enough time, then there is wear and tear that happens in the machine. And then why can't one think of aging as a manifestation of that wear and tear? So basically, this is simply called the wear and tear theory, and the idea is that lots of cell divisions, lots of physiological activities, lots of metabolism later, the cells in the body are simply not in a good enough shape such that they will be able to sustain their activity, and this lowering of the activity is what shows up as aging. So if, as I said, now what is the way in which this wear and tear can happen? Now remember that replication, transcription, translation, the three major processes by which information is flowing from the DNA to the protein, these processes, none of them are error free. Okay, there is a basal level of error in copying, and although there are mechanisms which take care of those errors, even after you account for the effect of the mechanisms, there is some residual rate at which errors are happening. So obviously, the accumulation of mutations can lead to this kind of, accumulation of damages due to the changes in the proteins, etc., can lead to wear and tear. And the other thing is that when metabolism is happening, all kinds of metabolic byproducts are being produced. Some of these actually get thrown out. So, for example, things like carbon dioxide, etc., gets thrown out. But there are other things, far more potent things like reactive oxygen species, which cannot be thrown out. Okay, which are there in the body, and although the body tries to do something with it, it tries to convert it into something else. But still, the point is that over long enough time, you can possibly see a negative effect of these. However, as I said, that most organisms are capable of doing some error correction, or they're capable of repairing such damages. For example, there is this enzyme called superoxide dismutase, which takes out the ROS in the cells. So the idea is that although the error correction mechanisms are there, these error correction mechanisms are operating at the peak of their efficiency. Okay, we know that. So okay, one step back. So if that be the case, then the question becomes that why can't natural selection makes the error correction mechanisms even better than what they are? Okay, so if aging is because of the failure of the error correction mechanism, then there should be a very strong selection to make the error correction mechanism better and better. And the counter to that is that there is a biological limit of error correction, and basically due to highly strong selection operating, the organisms have reached that limit. So there is no further genetic variation left for better error correction mechanism. And incidentally, this entire thing, this entire logic is true only if the aging at the level of cells, which is what all these things are trying to explain, translates into aging at the level of the whole individual. Okay, now we don't know for sure either way. Okay, we don't know for sure whether that happens, or we are not even sure whether that does not happen. All right, but let's for a moment think that it does happen and keep this part aside, and let's just go with this thing that maybe the wear and tear theory works because the organisms have reached whatever is the biological limits of error correction. Now, the question is that do we have any major reasons to believe in these kinds of theories? And it turns out that there is some major, line of evidence which supports this theory. And one of the most important one, the one that all of you have heard about, is what is known as telomere shortening. So you know that the telomere is like a cap at the end of the chromosome, and at every replication cycle, a part of the telomere is lost. And therefore, the idea is that when the telomere is lost, then the genes at the end, they are no longer being protected from the actions of different enzymes, and this way, they are getting shortened. Some amount of information is lost, and this is what is associated with aging. So this is something that has some degree of empirical support. So, for example, people have seen that this is in zebra finches, birds. They have seen that in this figure, the mean telomere length actually ends up declining with age. So, which means that older organisms have much shorter telomeres, which means that telomere shortening really happens in a very noticeable manner over the lifespan of a given organism. They have even looked, there is a lot of noise in the data, but on an average, you see a positive slope in this regression, which means that as telomere length increases, lifespan in general increases. So this kind of observation is what led to telomere, being the key to aging, at least in the minds of several people. However, when people probed deeper into it, turned out that these evidences, they are not really standing up to more detailed scrutiny. For example, these Young et al. In 2004, they did a study on the soil nematode Caenorhabditis elegans, and what they did was they overexpressed a telomere binding protein, as a result of which there was an increase in the telomere length. And when they looked at these guys, so what they are doing is they have age on x-axis and the percentage alive at that age on y-axis. So you can see that this is the control, these are the guys who have long telomeres, and you can see that for a given age, a larger fraction of the treatment guys with long telomeres are surviving, which means that this having a longer telomere is actually increasing their longevity, which agrees well with the telomere shortening hypothesis. However, if you go across species, then you see that the entire thing becomes very wobbly. So, for example, if you look at mammals, okay, you see that there is the relationship in mammals is actually negative, which means that those guys who have shorter telomeres, those are the ones who are actually living longer. And yeah, this is what is said over here, that controlling for evolutionary history, mammals show a significant inverse association between telomere length and maximum lifespan. So then one might say that, okay, maybe this is something that is pretty widespread. For whatever reason, the mammals are freaks and it's not operative in mammals, it works everywhere else. However, when people dug deeper, they found that even within Caenorhabditis elegans, where the previous study was done, even there, actually that correlation is very strain specific. You end up taking a different strain of C. elegans and you find no correlation between telomere length and longevity. And okay, humans are part of mammals, so that is already taken care of in the mammalian study in some sense. And if you look at mice, again, wild derived strains which have shorter telomeres, they have similar longevity compared to laboratory strains. So again, this association between telomere length and longevity is breaking down. So there have been several other studies, and the results have been pretty equivocal. In some cases, it works. In a vast majority of cases, it does not, which suggests that, that's what I have written, is complex at best and non-existent at worst, which basically means what the relationship is dependent on which animal you have picked up for your study. Okay, so one possibility over here is that the general theory of wear and tear is still correct. Okay, it is just that the wear and tear is not happening through telomere shortening. The wear and tear is happening through something else. I mean, we talked about Ross and some other stuff, right? So maybe the wear and tear is happening, but in a different manner. So that is where the question is that, why is it that selection has not been able to weed this out? And maybe, selection has been very strong, but essentially we have reached the limit of error correction, and therefore there is no variation left for whatever trait that we are talking about in terms of correcting the mechanism.
Sir,
Abolo?
the I mean, if this is the case and you cannot correct these errors, then these errors would keep accumulating generation by generation also, right? Through the germline.
No,
So clearly, it is possible to avoid.
no, 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 no. They don't have to accumulate in the germ line, right? They are happening at the somatic level. So everything that we are talking about over here is at the soma level. Why should they accumulate at the germ line level?
I mean, if it's something that is fundamental to the way cells operate, then in like every time you start with a zygote and it starts dividing and growing into full organism, you will have these kinds of damage accumulating with every cell division, and finally one of those cells will become a germline cell and go on to the next generation. So either you would see some kind of aging across generations, or you have to conclude that there is a way of perfect error correction in at least one of the cell lines, right? Or I'm missing something. Likeliest possibility.
Yeah, see, the point is that, okay, I'm not sure I entirely get your thing. What you are trying to say is that the germline, you know, since the germline in some sense is continuing over millennia, therefore these kind of things should have happened in the germline. Correct?
Yeah, or if there was a method of error correction there, then clearly we have not reached the method of error correction everywhere else, because that is the limit.
Yes. Okay. I don't think people in this context are saying that the germline has a different error correction mechanism and the soma has a different error correction mechanism. I don't think they're saying that. All that they are saying is that whichever place you look at, the germline or the soma, the error correction mechanism is the same, but that error correction mechanism should have had a strong selection, operating to make it better and better.
Huh, but clearly it is better in the germline than in the soma, right? Otherwise, as I said, every
No,
generation
no,
may would have more
no,
accumulating.
not necessarily. No. Why are you saying that it is better in the germline than in the soma?
Because
Hmm.
if I look at these errors and wear and tear happening within a cell,
Uh,
and and that cell is dividing and it's happening over the course of a lifetime in an
uh.
individual in a human being.
But the number of divisions that the germline is doing is much less compared to the number of divisions that the soma is doing. Na? There's a
Yeah, but
huge asymmetry over there.
okay, okay, maybe that explains it.
Hmm. Okay. Anything else? Okay. So, if this were to be the case, that organisms have reached the biological limits of error correction, there is no genetic variation left for it, then what is, I mean, this implies that the longevity of each group is basically at its highest. Okay, it cannot be any better, right? Then what is the way to validate that hypothesis?
To
Simplest.
see if just do an experiment, like put them in and see whether they get better or not.
What kind of an experiment? It's a
Like
special kind of an experiment.
um cohort studies, like no, that would only look
Cohort
at single
learning
life.
yoga. No, 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 no. See, we are talking about selection and variation, right? So you are
Okay, so
trying
look,
to
see if the
see
survivorship improves intergenerationally.
exactly. So basically, do a selection experiment. Okay, experimental evolution kind of a study, and see whether a conscious selection for longevity is capable of increasing the longevity of an organism or not. Right. So if that be the case, then the prediction is, if this were to be correct, then organisms should not be able to increase their lifespan even when there is a selection for that. Right. Now the question is, how would you select for longer lifespan? What would be the mechanism for it? And this is tied up with one of the questions that came up during the discussion yesterday. Can you guys suggest a way of doing it?
Kill off all the offspring unless the offspring were produced after a certain age of the parent. So in the first so much time of
Right.
the parent's life, if they have offspring, kill the offspring.
Right. So basically, allow only the offspring which are born at a age as late as possible to contribute to the next generation, essentially kill everybody else off. Correct? That's exactly what you said. However, if you are doing that, then what is the precise thing that you are selecting for?
A longer reproductive span.
Exactly. If you are doing that, then you are actually selecting for late life reproduction, which is the same thing as saying increasing okay, it is not exactly the same as saying increasing the span of reproduction. Technically, what you are seeing selecting for is increased late life reproduction. Correct.
Sir,
Uh,
will you keep the last baby of every organism, or you'll
in the
decide
population.
some
So
of every
see,
organism?
when you start doing it, you typically say that we will keep the babies of only those organisms which are, say, beyond 50 years of age. I'm just doing in a very human centric way. Okay. And then next cycle, you will say, I'll keep only the babies of those guys who are 52 or more years old.
Okay, okay. So then you are continuously improving that age also, so that you are
Huh.
continuously selecting.
For
Okay.
directional selection, yes. Okay. So the problem that happens is that if you are selecting for longer lifespan, then perforce you have to select for you know late life of late age reproduction. There is no other way. Okay, people have actually come up with very creative ways of doing it. I personally don't like it too much. There is at least one strategy that people came up with for selecting for longevity without selecting for late life fitness or late life fecundity. But barring that one glaring exception, pretty much everybody who has selected for lifespan has selected in this particular way. Okay, it
Uh,
doesn't really matter in the context of this particular discussion, but the reason I'm kind of focusing on this is to show you guys that sometimes, even though you want to select for one thing, you might have to select for another thing in order to reach there.
Sir,
Okay. Hmm.
I mean, you could just do this experiment with the grandkids instead of the kids, and you would have the selection for a long lifespan.
How will it work?
So if you can keep track of individuals, you have to do like something like what the grants did, where you keep track of the entire family tree. You say
Hmm.
that if the grandparents are not alive, I will kill the grandkids.
If the grandparents are not alive, then I'll kill the grandkids.
Hmm.
Uh, but at what stage? When the grandkids are born?
I mean, does it depend upon the lifespan of the species, right? So if they're typically around when the grandkids are born, then you have to do with the great grandkids. So it will become one more generation then. But
Okay,
that's
but
something that is
then
exceptional
no,
for
no,
that
no.
reason.
Then there is not much selection happening, right?
I'm I'm killing the grandkids. So unless you happen to belong to a long-lived lineage, you are not going to be allowed to live at all or reproduce.
Correct, but that kind of a selection will become very difficult because you have killed off the grandkids, right?
Yeah.
Huh.
But
So now, okay, or let me put it this way: you have only left those grandkids
Hmm.
whose parents were or whose grandparents were alive.
Yes.
Uh, okay, how will that work? Okay, let me think a little bit on this one. Essentially, you are doing what is known as lineage selection. Okay, lineage selection के लिए the one strategy that I talked about that works slightly differently. Let me just think whether this one will work or not. I'll have to think of it outside the class. All right. A priori, I have a feeling that it might mess up things a bit. Uh, Let me think about it. I won't comment on it one way or the other right now. All right. Sure.
Sir, can you
Buddha?
somehow stress the organisms to produce premature aging and then see how they cope with it?
Yes. Yes. That is one thing that people have done. Okay. But the problem is that the moment you are stressing, you are also introducing another selection factor. You are also selecting for their ability to withstand that stress, isn't it? And
Yes, but isn't aging basically that only how they cope with stress over
no, but if you
increasing?
push in another stress, then the evolution that you are getting is not in the context of aging alone.
Right. Yeah.
So, for example, you get the point, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, if you put more temperature, then it's also what they are doing to withstand that temperature.
Yeah. It's
So there
towards
is a
that
conformity.
specific pressure and
Exactly
not general
towards that
aging as such. Yeah.
precisely towards that specific pressure. So you'll have to do it over like 100 presses and then take an average or some crap like that. Okay. Okay. So the simpler, yeah. So as I said, the prediction is that organisms will not respond to selection for longer lifespan. Now this is something. This particular, you know, logic that for all those traits which are very important for fitness, okay, like fecundity, like this or some other traits, selection has taken it to perfection such that that trait cannot be further improved upon. That trait's value cannot be further increased. This particular notion was actually a pretty hard notion in biology till about 20-30 years back. Okay, even now in several papers, this particular thing keeps on cropping. That this thing is at the pinnacle of its success, and no amount of selection or no amount of further perfection is possible. And the first time when these aging studies that I'm going to discuss in a minute, these were among the studies which challenged this notion that even traits which are very important for fitness, most of them are actually not at the perfect level. Most of them actually are not in a situation where all genetic variation has been lost. You can still take them further. Okay, and this is historically very important because if you look at the original Darwinian conceptualization, one of the things that people have always been saying is that look, selection is a process which loses variation. Okay, if selection is indeed as strong as you are saying, and if selection is indeed as all pervasive as you are saying, then somewhere or the other all the variation has to be lost. And if that variation has to be lost, then somewhere or the other evolution has to come to a standstill. And since, for example, Drosophila is God knows how many million years old, and so on, since most of the species are on the planet for a very long time, therefore, it stands to reason that most of the species, at least for these important traits which have a direct bearing on fitness, are close to the level where there is no further genetic variation. This is an thing which has been there right since the time of Darwin. And anything and everything that was said in the context of modern synthesis, none of that actually nullified this notion. And one of the major, you know, insights that has come about in the last 20-30 years is this is not true. Even for very important traits, typically there is a lot of variation that is left, and if you select it properly, you will always get a response to the selection.
Sir, in our last class only, didn't you show us that for frequency dependent traits, this is not
Hmm.
true because your fitness does
Yes,
not monotonically increase.
correct. But I'm not talking about frequency dependent stuff. I'm talking about even frequency independent stuff. See, frequency dependent stuff, what I showed you was that the fitness kind of goes up and down, up and down, up and down.
Yeah, yeah.
Or rather, the frequency goes up and down.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and along with the frequency, the
Fitness
average
also
fitness of
fits.
the population will go up and down. What we are talking over here is not in that context at all. Okay,
Okay.
typically what we are talking about here are the polygenic traits. Okay,
Okay. And this is due to stochasticity, or this is there's some deeper reason for
uh,
it?
there is probably some deeper reason for it. I can discuss that. I mean, I won't have time for that in the context of this class. There are 3 or 4 reasons for which that is perhaps happening.
Okay.
Okay, we will come to those later. I mean, sorry, we'll not come to those in the context of this class. We can discuss it out. Okay, so uh, this is a study. The one that I'm going to show you is study from Michael Rose's group. There are several other people who undertook similar studies. So in Michael Rose's context, what he did was he had two populations or two kinds of populations of Drosophila melanogaster. The B populations, B stands for base populations. These reproduced at the around 4 days of adult age, that is after coming out as the flies, and therefore the selection is slightly on fertility during the early part of life. What Rose did was he took these populations, 5 of them, and then every generation he collected the eggs for the next generation later and later in life. Okay, so continuously he kept on pushing it backwards, and after some generations, these guys, their eggs were being collected to 70 days after egg collection, which means 70 days after eclosion, which means 10 weeks after eclosion. So by the time these guys, they were collecting eggs from them, these guys, they were dead, were over. Okay, so just to show you this thing, so this is the age on x-axis, and this is the percentage survivorship on y-axis. These are the B populations, these are the O populations. So by day 60, everybody is dead in the B population. Okay, whereas the eggs in these populations for the next generation are being collected somewhere around here. The population actually, some of the individuals are hanging on till about day 130 or so, right? So suggesting that not only can you select for it, the amount of selection that you can do is truly astounding. Okay, so the mean is greater than the highest value over here. That kind of selection is possible. So,
Sir, after reproduction,
Hmm.
did the age after reproduction also increase? Like that increase is not so much, I guess.
So if you think
Like,
about it, this is where they're reproducing. Can you see my cursor?
yes, and we have
Huh.
50 more days with this
Exactly.
one.
Exactly.
Okay.
These guys are going for about 60 more days, and these guys are total living for about 60 days.
Hmm.
Okay. So obviously it's a massive increase even in this time. I mean, you can see it, right? This is the part over here. After the mean, you have just this much. Here, after the mean, you have this much. That's a massive increase even in the tail.
But it looks like that O guys are, after some time, like they're slowly dying,
Hmm.
but most of them are dead by 100 something. No?
Yes, but even this 100 is far ahead of this part, right? And you are right. The basic point over here is that this tail is very long. Okay, so
Yeah.
these are not your classical normal curves which are symmetric around the mean. So these are the so-called fat-tailed things. Okay, so if you guys remember when we were studying this tipping point, okay, Do you remember I was talking about extreme value theory and all that? Okay, whatever. I did. Okay,
Yes.
देख लेना. So वहाँ पे that is the kind of distribution that you find over here too. So essentially, you end up getting some individuals which live for very, very, very long amount of time. Only a few of them, but the proportion of those guys actually ends up increasing in the population. So this is what is known as a fractal distribution. Okay. So
Okay.
your intuition is primarily based on a normal distribution kind of a distribution. This is not normal. This is fractal. Okay. Anything else?
No, sir.
ठीक है. No, I was asking anybody else has anything. ठीक है. So it doesn't look like, taken together, that the wear and tear theory is generalizable. It probably works in certain cases. For example, those C. elegans and those zebra finches that we talked about. But it definitely doesn't seem to be a general theory across all time. Now then obviously people have said that forget about all those things. Forget about generic mechanisms. It's probably some one gene or two genes somewhere which controls aging. And this is the kind of thinking that, okay, somebody's mic, there's a lot of sound.
Sorry, sir.
Okay, thank you. So people said that, okay, maybe we don't have such mechanisms per se, but there are a few genes, genes for aging. And for the last several years, there has been a holy grail kind of a search for figuring out the genes for longevity. And hundreds of genes have been implicated. This link, you can go there and you can have a look at the laundry list. But every one of those, either if you take them singly or you take them as a group of genes, none of them is again generalizable across taxa. So looks like you can figure out what's happening specifically in a given taxa, but you don't get anything which connects all taxa. So this is where, as I said, the search is still on. So this is where we go to the second class of theories of aging, which is the evolutionary theories of aging. Okay. I have 5 more minutes. Okay, I think I'll stop over here and I'll pick up the evolutionary theories of aging in the next class. So this is where some of the PopDyne that we learned is going to come in handy. Yeah. So yeah, that's about it for this class. You guys have any questions? We have about 5 minutes to take the questions.
So, isn't the removal of all genetic variations bad for the species?
Yes.
So, in a sense,
Sorry. We are not talking about genetic variation at the level of the genome. We are talking about genetic variation in the context of that particular trait, which is the error correction mechanism trait over here.
okay, but if if there are no errors or very less errors, then
No. It's in the error correction mechanism. So if the error correction mechanism is so good that there are no errors, or it's so good that there are extremely few errors, that's how you have to put it.
Yes. So if there are extremely few errors in the, this is about errors in the replication, right?
Replication, translation, and all that. Yeah.
So
Also transcription.
doesn't this lead to less variation overall? Because variation arises due to errors, right?
No. You are confusing between variation happening at the level of the proteins with variation that is happening across generations. So you remember we had a quick discussion about the soma and the germplasm over here with I think Akash it was. Okay.
Yes, sir.
So see the body, all sexually reproducing organisms body has two parts. One part is the reproductive thing, which is what is known as the germ line. Okay, the testes and the sperms and their progenitor cells, and the ovum and their progenitor cells. So these are the ones which are taking you from generation to generation. So whenever selection is happening, selection is going to operate through the genes that are present in the germline. Correct? Because that is what is going from generation to generation.
Yes.
However, these mechanisms, these errors that we are talking about, that is happening in the context of the body. It's happening in the context of one organism. And when it is happening inside the body of an organism, then the cells that we are talking about, they are part of the soma, the somatic part.
Okay.
So they're part of your heart, they're part of your lungs, they're part of your brain, and so on and so forth. None of which is going to the next generation.
Yes.
So the errors that we are talking about is happening because that one zygote became this big an individual, and then that that the cells are continuously dividing over your lifetime, right?
Yes, sir.
All cells are essentially, there is a turnover of every single cell except the neurons and a few others. So that is where the issue is, that when those cells are continuously dividing, they are accumulating errors, and those errors are the ones that are causing aging, which is pretty much the same as the argument for cancer. Replication keeps on happening, mutations keep on happening, mutations accumulate, therefore cancer.
But is the error correction mechanism different for the two things, the germline and the soma?
That's exactly the point I made, that it is not. There
But
is
sir,
no reason for us to believe so.
so if the mechanism is the same and you have very few errors in the soma, then that should also imply there's very few errors in the germline, right? So doesn't that limit selection?
No. The problem is that we are not saying that there are very few errors in the soma. There are lots of errors in the soma. Okay, but the wear and tear theory is saying that whatever errors is there, we cannot make it any better.
Oh, okay.
See, if we started by saying that there are very, very few errors, then the question is that then aging should not happen, isn't it?
Yes.
But we know aging happens, which means that the number of errors is pretty large, and people can compute it. We have good estimates of how many errors are expected per replication cycle and so on. Okay. So number is high. Point is, we feel that it cannot be made any lower. Okay.
Sir,
Bolo?
how do you then take something into account, which is we talked about how when it comes to asexual organisms, aging as you defined it does not apply, that definition which we did. But setting aside your definition, if you have a mechanistic theory where there is a buildup of errors, then in asexual organisms you should have a corresponding buildup across generations. So how does this theory take care of that? These theories.
It doesn't.
So
as simple as that.
I mean, are they trying to take care of it? Are they looking for?
I don't think so. I don't think anybody is looking for aging in bacteria except Milind. Okay. So yeah. I mean, have you come across aging microbes, huh?
No, I haven't. But it's not necessarily aging. Like something you have to, even if you don't find aging, you have to find some way in which they're preventing aging, so to speak. So someone which they're preventing these errors from accumulating. Because this argument should apply to asexually reproducing organisms.
No, but I'm trying to show you that the argument is not correct, right?
Okay, yeah. I mean, people who are arguing for it must have realized this is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, there is Nature Reviews Microbiology review called Microbial Aging and Longevity. Okay, they are saying that there is growing evidence that microorganisms undergo senescence. Interesting.
Okay, I'll look up the review then.
Okay. Yeah. I'll have to do. I'll do the same. I'll give you guys the link. Um, I should be able to get the DOI easily. Let us. They're giving me the DOI. There you go.
Sir, so I had a
Yeah.
question. So why are we
Just one second, Aditya. I have put the link in the chat. Bolo.
yeah, so why are we stopping at error correcting itself? Why can't we select for, say, robustness or say redundancies in processes like translation or then protein structure, and that way
Absolutely.
selection can never really stop, right?
See, the point is that this particular. Okay, first of all, let me go step by step. Why are you saying that selection cannot stop in that context? If you are having.
Because there are so many steps in the whole process of from gene to organism then to behavior, right? So because of the many steps that we could always select at every state, at every step. So instead of just error correction of say DNA to mRNA, then we could also make the process of mRNA to protein more robust. Say different sequences lead to the same protein. Then we could also look for a protein, the amino acid sequence to protein structure, and then
So there
so
are
on.
many cases where the errors happen. That's what you are saying, right?
Yes, and
Huh.
error correction at the translation level, that seems like a very singular approach, is saying selection stops there, and then that
No,
process
no,
cannot.
no, 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 no. See, that is where this selection studies are so important. Selection studies are not making any a priori assumption about what the mechanism of error correction is. Okay, that assumption is only being made by people who are trying to find those mechanisms. Selection is saying that, look, you are telling me that whatever the way, how so many steps over which that way is distributed, whatever it is, over everything, things have been made the best that it can be. It has been made most perfect. Now I'm trying to see if I can better perfection. And lo and behold, I can better perfection, which means that the initial system was not perfect to begin with. So wear and tear theory is trying to, I mean, this thing about the organism, having reached the pinnacle of its whatever error correction possibility, that thing is not true.
Right.
There's
So
this
we're not
explain what you're
considering
saying.
any specific error correction mechanism, just saying as a broad error correction has been optimized
Integrated over the entire thing.
at all levels.
Yes,
Right.
integrated over everything. Correct. Okay, so it's 14:50 already. So what I'll do is I'll stop the recording, and then people who want to leave can leave. Soham, are you there? Soham Chanda?
Yes, yes, sir.
So this is going into your. So please shift